everyone. One of the things I love doing is chatting with authors about their work, what inspires them, what's coming next. So today I'm really excited to introduce you to Paul Tremblay, one of today's top names in horror and suspense. Paul has won the Bram Stoker, the British Fantasy, and the Massachusetts Book Awards. He's written dozens of short stories and a bunch of novels, including The Little Sleep, A Head Full of Ghosts, and The Cabin at the End of the World. On a personal note, I've known Paul for 15 years now, and I have to say he is one of the kindest and most talented people I know. Hey, Paul, thanks so much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Aaron. That was very kind of you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So, okay, I love talking about adaptations so much that I focused my graduate studies on the art of adaptation and how stories change when fitting them into different story forms, like books to film, games to novels, or other publications. And I have really been looking forward to having this discussion with you on adaptations and kind of digging into your novel, Cabin at the End of the World, which was recently adapted into the film Knock at the Cabin by M. Night Shyamalan. Paul, can you just give people just a quick elevator pitch on the book before we get started, just to kind of set the table on that?
Sure. I'm so bad at elevator pitches, so it'll be a rambly pitch. But the novel opens with a young family, two dads in their late 30s, early 40s, and they have an adopted daughter named Wen, and she's 7 going on 8. They rented a cabin in northern New Hampshire, purposefully sort of off the grid, out of cell phone range, because I needed to tell a horror story. And the novel opens with Wen out in front of the cabin, catching grasshoppers, playing by herself. Her dads are out in the back porch, because there's no other cabins for miles around. And then this stranger, a very large stranger named Leonard, walks up the street and sort of, starts, chatting up Wen. And Wen knows, like, oh, I shouldn't talk to the stranger, but despite his size, he's actually really charming and seems gentle. And then during their conversation, 3 other strangers show up carrying like weird homemade looking weapons. And Leonard tells Wen, we're sorry. Your family's gonna have to make a tough decision. We need your help to prevent the end of the world. And then things go from there.
That's a lot to put on a little girl. Like,
it is. Yes.
How old is Wen again? She's like 6.
I think she's 7 going on 8, or man, I should remember this. It's very close to her birthday. So I'm pretty sure she's 7 going on 8, because like 6 going, there's a big difference between early 7 and early 8 in terms of language and being able to talk and stuff like that. Not being able to talk, but be able to converse with adults. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's old enough to know what Leonard is saying and understands it and is like, oh my God, I need to get out of here and go see my dad.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, was this your first book that got optioned? Have you ever been through this process before?
So it wasn't the first book that was optioned. The Little Sleep was optioned way back in like 2010, 2011, but like that was it. Like nothing other than like, hey, we optioned it. There was like no discussion. It never got close. So I almost feel like that doesn't count. But A Head Full of Ghosts was optioned the spring of 2015. And so by the time Cabin had been optioned, A Head Full of Ghosts had been under option for like three-ish years. And it had some, I don't want to say close calls, but it was building up towards maybe a production, like insofar as that there was a screenplay and then there was maybe a director. So with that book, it's always been like, oh, we ramp up and then it sort of falls apart, and then they start over again, ramp up and it falls apart.
It's such a good book too.
Thanks.
I hope it comes through at some point.
Yeah, well, everything's on hold right now with the strike, obviously, but they're sort of with that one, they're at the place where new director, new screenplay, almost like starting over from scratch. Same set of producers.
So when you got the call that M. Night Shyamalan was interested in Cabin at the End of the World, what was your response to that? Were you like, another adaptation or another like? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on one level, it's like, with A Head Full of Ghosts, and then plus other experiences, like you always, I don't know, producers always, I think, purposefully throw like huge names at you to try to get you excited.
Right.
Everyone wants to be a friend until they don't talk to you anymore, is how it sort of
Right.
works. It's been my experience. So I've heard like cool, exciting names like, oh, like, well, I'm not going to get too excited until it becomes a thing. And the funny part is his name first came up in the summer of 2019. And for late spring and early summer, there was a flurry of activity where they did, when I say they, Film Nation, the original producers, hired a couple directors. And, that felt like it was getting closer because those two directors were trying to fit this into their schedule because they had another movie to do. So if it was going to happen, it was going to happen quickly. But towards the end of the summer, it looked like it wasn't going to happen. But one of my last conversations with those directors was like, oh yeah, we had a call with M. Night Shyamalan who wanted to be a producer. And, and they said, his vision of the movie was much different than theirs.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, oh, for a while, it's like, maybe he wants to be a producer, maybe not, who knows? But just about a year later, it became, oh, he wants to do it. He has a film deal in hand, essentially. He had a film deal with Universal. So it essentially became, if he wants to make it, it'll get made. So then it started feeling like more real, but we had to wait for him to finish Old, which came out, 21, I think? The summer of 21, I think. Yeah. Yes, it was definitely the summer of 21.
So this all came through during the pandemic. So that must have been like an added, like, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Because it's the pandemic.
Right. No, for sure. I mean, there was all of that. I mean, A Head Full of Ghosts probably would have filmed the summer of 2020 if not for the pandemic. So, I mean, already, like so many people, so many projects were sort of squashed, which is a small problem comparative to the rest of the world that we all had to deal with. But yeah, so then it became okay. It seemed more real. But eventually, it was like, oh, I saw Instagram pictures of him in the summer of 2021 talking about him writing a screenplay. So I know he pretty much rewrote the screenplay from scratch. Maybe not fully scratch, but a lot scratch. And then, so my first phone call. I mean, so that's a long version of a short question to say. I talked to him in November of 21. When I finally talked to him, it already felt like, okay, this is happening. But it was sort of really, it was a weird sort of surreal experience talking to him on the phone. It was like, oh, I watched this, like so many people, I watched The Sixth Sense in the late 90s. And that was before I was even like thinking, I was messing around with writing, but I wasn't serious about it. So yeah, it was pretty wild to be talking to him on the phone about the book.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's it. I mean, compared to the other stories that you've told and really other stories I've heard from other writers, that's a pretty quick process. And, to wrap your head around it and to realize this thing is happening. And it's happening at that point, it seems like it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, once Old finished, it was full speed ahead. Like finished the screenplay that summer, started Ike casted Dave Bautista late fall of 21.
Yeah.
Then they went to pre-production in the spring and they filmed, what was it, like April, May, June of 2022.
The perfect time to come to New England, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, he's a Philly guy, so they do everything down there. Which is fine. Which I appreciate as someone who pretty much puts all his stuff in Massachusetts or New England. So
right. So what I want to do, I want to kind of kick things off by playing a really short clip of the opening. So this is I think this is actually in the trailer itself as well. So but I think it does a really good job of kind of setting up the look and feel of the film itself.
Hi there. Can I talk to you for a little bit?
You have to come inside right now. There were 4 of them.
What do we say? You shouldn't make things up when we're talking about...
Can you open the door, please?
They're breaking in!
So I have to say, I've read the book, watched the movie, and that scene, I mean, there are a lot of scenes in the movie that work really well with the book. But that opening set of scenes, when the film just kind of begins, really establishes the look and feel. It ups the energy. It creates that tension that I felt was, as a reader, was a really tight fit with the book. And I thought, all right, we've started this out really well. This is great. I love it. From an author's perspective, what did you think? How did that opening work for you? Did that kind of align with what you were looking for? Did that adaptation kind of kick off the way you were hoping?
Yeah, no, I love the opening, and it's pretty much how the book opens with no very little to flashback. It's it's Wen and Leonard
Right.
talking on the grass because when I was writing it, I knew I could like really take my time with that opening chapter because just the reader, just from the fact of knowing like here's this strange large person, talking to this little girl and have sort of that like why is he here? She shouldn't be, doing this. Have that tension. So the longer I sort of went with it, I knew that would sort of hopefully ramp up the tension some more. So no, visually I thought the opening was great. I really loved that he included when catching the grasshoppers, which is sort of like a nice parallel, the 7 grasshoppers in the jar to the 7 people ultimately in the cabin. And yeah, all that stuff was great.
Yeah, I loved it. I felt like that opening, especially in the film and actually in the book as well, really left me thinking what could happen next. Like it really opened it up. Like what a crazy way to start a film or a movie, because
Yeah.
you just don't know how that's going to transpire after that. There's one other clip that I want to play really quickly that kind of gets to the premise of the story, and then from there, well, let's chat about like
Sure.
how things rolled after this point. So this is after clearly after they've entered the cabin.
We're not here to hurt you, but you have to stay here in the cabin with us. Families throughout history have been chosen to make this decision. Your family must choose to willingly sacrifice one of the 3 of you to prevent the apocalypse.
And I think that actually sets up the premise really well. There are some little details that are different from the book to the film that you can actually see in that clip. And so I think that's where I want to go next with this discussion is when it came to the adaptation process, when you started, how far along were you, or how much impact did you have on guiding the film to make sure it stayed as close to the book as possible? Because there are some big parts where it diverges in a big way.
So I would say ultimately I had very little impact on what the final product was. But so before Knight was on board, however, so it got optioned early 2018, 6 months before it even got published, and then I think just about like 15 months later, they had a second draft of a screenplay, which I read. Now, I didn't have any contractual say, but the producers were very cool about letting me read the screenplay and give notes, because there were things I didn't, that I wasn't 100% on board with. But again, they didn't have to listen to me. So to their credit, they listened to me, and I don't know if they made any changes. But then, when the new directors came, they were fans of the book. And I did have some fun conversations with them about what changes I would make to the screenplay, and I think they were very amenable to that. I mean, we're going to talk spoilers. Is that okay? Yeah, I'm going to say yes. Yeah,
I don't think we can talk about the adaptation unless we talk about spoilers. So definitely.
Yeah, with those directors and with the original screenplay, kept the death of Wen, excuse me, and all the fine interest passed because they didn't want Wen to die. I mean, that was like one round. That was really quick. So I don't know if they went for more rounds or tried to dig more into it, but that was sort of the end of the original screenplay. But once Knight came on board, I didn't read the screenplay until after I visited the set. So when things were all emotion. So, I mean, they weren't looking for my feedback on that at all. I mean, before filming started, Knight would ask me, text me a few questions little detail stuff hey, did you think about last names for these people? And I hadn't, but I offered some just fun suggestions. He did end up giving Sabrina the last name of Gittins, who is my friend / publicist from England, Lydia Gittins. He asked me where the inspiration for the weapons came from and stuff like that. But in terms of the actual what ended up happening on screen, I had zero say with.
Yeah, when looking at the book versus the film, I would just say, in my opinion, the book is a real tragedy. It really is a tragic book, but a very strangely loving book at the same time. The movie, I think, definitely is more toward the horror psychological thriller than, I don't know if it's true to say more than the book, but M. Night Shyamalan, I think, intentionally put some answers in the film that you didn't put in the book.
Yeah.
You really made an effort not to answer it. You left it up to the reader and up to the characters to kind of decide what was real for them. Was there anything, and spoilers are okay, was there anything where you felt like, man, I wish he wouldn't have given that away on the film, that you thought maybe spoiled the story a little too much?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I like the movie, but I don't like the end. I don't like that he really leaned into, and even like in the Blu-ray extras, you know, he talks about he wanted to make like this biblical story. And when I was writing, obviously I was referencing and riffing on sort of stereotypical, not stereotypical, but like stuff from the Judeo-Christian, you know, tradition of the apocalypse, the four horsemen, etc. But like I was careful, like, you know, they never much in the book talk about God very much at all. And, you know, Knight wanted it to be like almost like this Isaac Abraham Bible story, which he talked about, which, you know, I had zero interest in. You know, with the book, I wanted it, you know, I wrote it at the sort of dawn of Trump's presidency. And when I was writing it, like typically I don't write stuff with like, oh, I want with a certain political sort of theme in mind. Usually it just happens naturally, but it's like, oh, I want to write a book that feels like our anxieties over this time. Like, to me, like I wanted the book to be ambiguous as to whether or not apocalypse was happening, because that reflects like every time we looked at our phone or computer screen or TV, it felt like the world was falling apart, but you don't know. Like, and I wanted the book to be that, and then ultimately to have, you know, the Andrew and Eric, you know, have to make a decision without knowing for sure, but also make a decision that they would be comfortable with on either side of that sort of, there's something happening or there's not something happening.
And that's really interesting how you did that, because when you're reading the book and you're reading about the tsunami or you're reading about the bird flus, you're like, I just saw that on TV. Like, is there someone in a cabin somewhere that's making a choice right now?
Yeah. No, I mean, but that was purposeful. Like I took things that you could see, and, you know, in the book, it's more it's more easily rationally explained away in the book, even though these horrible things are happening. You can, than what happens in the movie. Like in the book, you know, the last thing that happens is like 7 airplanes crash, which I think you could more easily say, oh, maybe there's some sort of coordinated cyber attack kind of thing. But in the film, it's like, I think they said 700 at one point. Just
it was a ton.
Yeah,
it was a ton. One thing I do like in the film that I guess that you didn't put in the book was there was an image in the film where they were standing on the porch or out in the grass, and they look up and there's just this plane just like drifting down to the ground, and it's almost like a leaf, a beautiful leaf, just kind of drifting down. And then you realize there are like hundreds of people on that plane, and they're dying. It's definitely a different view than the book. When in the book, it really didn't. You didn't get that. You didn't see that. You only saw what Leonard and the team
on the TV. Right.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
So there were a few other things, and you already mentioned this. This is the big spoiler, people. In the book, Wen dies. In the film, Wen doesn't die. And I think for me, that's what makes the book a tragedy, because the loss of Wen, who is the most beautiful character in the book, like she's just a gentle soul. And when she dies, it's just a tragedy. Nobody planned for it. It wasn't meant. Nobody wanted it. And it kind of destroyed everybody to some extent. She lives in the film, and I think that creates some interesting dynamics that make the film work in a way. Do you think, I know none of us, I know we all thought I thought the book was better than the film. I'll just say it. The book is better.
I forgot to wear my t-shirt that said the book was better.
The book is better than the film. But do you think that the death, or the non-death
Yeah.
of Wen. How does that for you work out in the film? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, but the difference between the two stories, I mean, that's definitely the fulcrum. I mean, because if you just logically follow, like, okay, she doesn't die, then, if I put myself into Eric or Andrew's shoes, I can, I can, I can better, or I can more like sort of rationalize. Okay, we're gonna sacrifice one of us for, so Wen gets to live, kind of thing. Which to me is, still super horrific. Whereas, in the book, obviously that's not there. And I wanted to, make that hurt more, with the idea that, like that doesn't count because it was a willing sacrifice.
Yeah.
Just, but also to represent just the capriciousness of, if this is indeed some sort of, supreme being controlling everything, how awful and cruel it is, which I think happens also in the Night film, but sort of in a different way. I would never write a sequel to my book, but I'm weirdly interested in writing like a sequel to the movie because, you mentioned before, like, his movie is horrifying. I think his ending is way more horrifying than mine, deaths went aside. Because now Wen and Andrew, not only did they essentially sacrifice, their husband and one of their dads, they have to live with the knowledge that there's this incredibly cruel supreme being that just, you mentioned the planes, like just let all these people, thousands upon thousands of people die just for what? Like for one of them to kill it? Like it doesn't make any sense. It's extremely cruel. So I'd be really interested in writing a story about when she's 19 and like at a death cult, is trying to kill God or something. So, I mean, that goes back to the book, which was the choice that the two dads refused. Like, essentially, they're saying, even if it is real, it's wrong. Like, this is immoral. We refuse to participate.
Right. What kind of world would we live in if we had to make that kind of choice? And it does make me wonder. It's been a while since I read the book, so I can't remember exactly. But I think in the book, was this the first time this choice was made, or was this choice made like the film portrays, like it's been many times in history? Because if it's the many times in history, then I can't help but to look back and think to myself, how many more times and how many more of those horrible things that we saw happen were about, the choices people were making.
Yeah, in the book, the invaders never said, this has happened before. Like, I know in the clip that you mentioned, Leonard says, families throughout history have had to make this choice, which again, what a horrible thing. Yeah.
We've all been like suckered. Yeah. So I know we're coming up on time. I could sit and talk with you forever, Paul, because it's so much fun just to chat about film and books.
I know, and I forgot that this was your degree. I mean, so you're an expert in adaptation. You can tell me how I should feel.
It's funny. I actually love adaptations because different story forms have different affordances, and it changes the way the film feels. And I love telling this story, so you have to listen to me tell this story.
Sure.
When I was doing my research project, my mentor, Nancy Holder, asked me who would I like to talk to, because she's like, I'll hook you up with someone. Just tell me who you want. So, of course, I'm like, I don't know, Neil Gaiman, thinking she'd be like, that's not going to work out. She's like, let me ask. So I actually got like 27 minutes, and 27, like not 28, but 27.
What an odd number.
Right. So I know he's like, he actually it was supposed to be like 20, but he stretched it out because he was having a lot of fun talking about Lord of the Rings. But one of the things that he said about Lord of the Rings was during the adaptation process of, he'd grown up watching or reading the books. And then when he started watching the films, they were changing his memory of the story. Yeah. And the story for him was changing. And he didn't like it. So at that point, I don't know if it's changed since, but at that point, he said, I never watched the final movie. And I thought to myself, oh my God, he is like hardcore story. And that is exactly what I want to get into with adaptations is how does a story change and how does that affect the people who really love the original thing they saw? And it doesn't have to be the original form. It's just the original thing they saw or read or experienced. So for me, with your book and this film, They were really close for a long time. They really
Yeah.
were aligned. And then there was that point, and it really was the point of Wen's death where we took a direction in the film that was really interesting, but it wasn't the book. And the book just leaves you contemplating so many things, so like the future of the world. What would you do in that moment? Was it real? Was it not real? And if it was real, is that a world you would want to live in anyway?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's sort of what I was aiming for. It is weird to think about. I mean, it's obviously a privilege to be in this position. So I remember I went to a convention called ICFA, the International Conference for Fantastic in the Arts. And this was more than a few years ago. And there was a panelist of science fiction writers who had been through adaptation. And essentially everyone on stage had a miserable experience, except for Ted Chiang. He really liked the adaptation of The Story of Your Life, which became Arrival, which is a great film and a great story. I think
it's great.
It's a great example of both things being really awesome. But even he at like one point is, it's like the weird thing to think about is for the vast majority of people that know the story, they're going to know it as the film.
Right.
Because so many more people, watch movies than read books. So that is a little weird to think about, I mean, obviously I care about everything I write, but I don't know, that book is, Cabin is an important thing to me. So it is a little strange to think about, but again, like a good problem to have.
Yeah, it's interesting. There probably are a lot of people who watched the film and then really liked it and wanted to see what the differences were in the book. And we're like, Paul Tremblay, what have you done?
Yeah, it's funny, like very anecdotally, just from people, that have directly interacted with me, I feel like that direction's gotten better experience-wise, where people haven't read the book but saw the movie and then read the book, like ended up liking the movie, I think, as opposed to people who read the book and then saw the movie. It just seems like there's a lot of people who are angry about it, but there were some people who liked it too. So I don't know. The book was pretty polarizing. I think the movie is as well.
Yeah, I think they both were polarizing, and they both actually get you thinking about different things in different ways. And for me, that's what story's all about. I mean, that's why I read books. That's why I watch films. That's why I like to interview and talk to people. That's why I like to, I don't know, go to conventions and just like talk story with people, because that's, I think, the heart of what humans do. And they want to share their stories.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you. And I'm the same as a reader and a movie watcher.
Yeah. So, all right, we are pretty much at the end of our time, but before I let you go, I have two things that I want to say. First, having Dave Bautista as Leonard was an amazing choice on M. Night Shyamalan's part. Like, he was a similar but different character in the book. And having Dave Bautista in that role was just like, it was a stroke of genius. And I felt he really nailed it. He
did. Absolutely. No, my favorite part of the movie are the actors and their performances.
Yeah. And also like Rupert Grint. I mean, you had Ron Weasley as one of the horsemen. And, I never thought Ron Weasley would be in that position.
Yeah.
But, this was a great film for him, because I think it really broke him out of that, like, sweet Hogwarts kid role. And now he's a full-born actor at this point. So he was a really good adaptation or choice for that adaptation.
Agreed.
So what do you have coming up next? You're always on to something new and something exciting. What have you got going on?
Well, depending on when this airs, but July 11th, my next book comes out. It's called The Beast You Are. It's a short story collection where like a good chunk of them have some sort of monster or creature or people acting monstrous. That's sort of the riff on the title. And the title of the book is also the title of an original novella that I wrote for the collection. It's an anthropomorphic animal novella that was a lot of fun to write. It's basically my love letter to Watership Down and other anthropomorphic animal stories.
I love it. Okay, I'm definitely going to have to get that book. And if anybody is in the New England area, here's a list of where you can find Paul next. And I don't know, I think I know many, not all, but many of these people on the list. Are there any bookstores or people you're looking forward to? I know you can't really choose.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to all of them. Obviously, Beverly's my hometown, so that'll be fun with Michael Sisko. I guess I would point people out to the release date of July 11th at Brookline Booksmith. It's such a great store.
Yeah.
And it's with Clemence Michel, and her debut novel, The Quiet Tenant, is out. It's a different kind of serial killer novel, and it's really wonderful. So I would definitely recommend that book. I also got to say I'm super excited for all of them, but also the Brooklyn one with Angel Luis Colon's first novel, or his first YA novel. That's his release, and Robert Levy has an amazing short story collection out too. I mean, I could say great things about everybody here, but I'll stop there.
It's a great list. It's a great list. For people who want to learn more about you, Paul, or find your books, where can they find you? Where can they go to get more Paul Tremblay?
I'm hiding. So my website, paultremblay.net. These days, I'm probably on Instagram the most sort of actively. It's at Paul G. Tremblay. I don't know, my father is also a Paul Tremblay. That's why the G is there, but his is N, so we're not the same person.
So be sure, people, not to contact Paul's dad.
He's out on Instagram. Thankfully.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Paul. It was such a pleasure to have you here. As always, it's so much fun to talk with you. And for our viewers, if you like this interview, please be sure to give me a thumbs up for the video so you can get more videos coming your way. And also to hit the little subscribe button and get new reviews and other interviews coming up soon. So thanks, everybody. And thank you, Paul. It has been fantastic.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right. Bye, everybody.